Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
OECD Country Risk Classification classifies Georgia's risk as high already for 16 years since 2007 without change. The country risk classifications are meant to reflect country risk. Under the participant system, country risk encompasses transfer and convertibility risk. The risk a government imposes capital or exchange controls that prevent an entity from converting local currency into foreign currency and or transferring funds to creditors located outside the country, for example. In cases of force majeure, for example, war, expropriation, revolution, civil disturbance, floods, earthquakes. According to the OECD methodology, the country risk classifications are not sovereign risk classifications and therefore should not be compared with the sovereign risk classifications of private credit rating agencies, CRAs. Conceptually, they are more similar to the country ceilings that are produced by some of the major CRAs, OECD explains. During the last Investors' Council meeting in Georgia, the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham, activated this issue, saying that investors are troubled by the low assessment in the index. The countries are assessed on the 0 to 7 scale, where 0 is the best score and 7 is the lowest. Georgia maintains 6 as its score for consecutive 16 years already since 2007. The Checkpoints interviewed the executive director of AmCham, George Welton. Mr. Welton, thank you for your time and thank you for taking our questions. In the first place, why did AmCham pay attention to this OECD index? You raised the issue at the last Investors' Council.
Yeah, we brought this issue up because it had been brought to us by a few members that the country risk profile was currently lower than it should be, and that had negative consequences on the cost of borrowing for certain kinds of companies.
It seems that this low assessment, it is like 6 points out of 7, has been in place for around 16 years. What could help to that stagnation in just one index?
So basically as you say, 0 to 7 system, we are number 6 at the moment, while other countries like Uzbekistan, Bangladesh, and North Macedonia, which actually do less well than we do on other indexes like S&P, Moody's, and Fitch, they actually have a score of 5, so they actually do better than we do at the moment. And it would be better if we could actually move ourselves to a 5 in order that people who are importing goods from the West can actually do so borrowing money from export credit agencies at a lower rate. The way we basically get to that point is that the Ministry of Finance, which is currently working on this, needs to go and have discussions with the various countries involved in making this OECD assessment and make the argument to them that the risk rating is currently too negative.
You mentioned Fitch ratings and S&P, but when you read OECD's indexes methodology, they kind of underline that these are like separate assessments, and that Fitch's and S&P's sovereign country assessments, these ratings are different than what OECD does, and that these kinds of indexes are not really comparable.
Sure. I mean, they of course make the point that this is a different index, and all of the indexes have their own rules that are regulating them. But the underlying logic behind the indexes is very similar. So it would be very strange for us to do very well in S&P and very poorly in Moody's, for example. And so as a result, you tend to see those two ratings moving together. So in this case, you would also expect really this classification, though it is a separate one, to move with the other ones. I think basically the reason why it's been out of line is that they don't make a reassessment on a yearly basis unless it has been brought to their attention by OECD member countries that this current rating is perhaps out of alignment. It's not something they just redo every year. So the necessary first step for that is that we need to kind of get organized and make that argument directly to the countries. The countries will then get OECD to do another assessment. And I'm pretty confident that if OECD does another assessment, that we'll see the rating improve.
Maybe the index and the research itself, the study itself that OECD undertakes is more open to you because it is quite close for us. I mean, we cannot see the analysis behind the logic that OECD has behind this number, this 6. Do you know like which components contribute the most to this stagnation? They have like different components. It is economic, political, transfer, exchange rates, sovereign, and also geographical. So which ones are problematic in these analyses, in this OECD's analysis?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, and I have to admit I don't claim to be a deep expert on this subject as a whole, but my understanding is that the issue here is not that they have made an assessment we disagree with, it's that they haven't done an assessment very recently. Because unlike some of these systems, OECD are not sending someone to the country to redo the assessment every year. So we need to basically convince the OECD member states who are effective in this decision making to just redo the assessment. Exactly what they will find and exactly what they will change to move us up in that rating is hard to be particularly clear on. But we have improved against the standards of other credit rating entities over the years for a range of reasons. And I would expect those same reasons to lead to an improvement here.
And my last question, and thank you for your time again. So you recommend that the Ministry of Finance has to have communication with OECD directly, so that this so that there is a clearer picture on this index, right? Because if your investors approach you, then this means that this is the index that investors globally take into account.
I mean, I don't know to what extent investors generally are looking at this index. This index officially plays a very specific role, and that is that it's the index that is used by export credit agencies of national countries when they are deciding whether to give credit to exporting entities. Now this is pretty complicated, but what it basically means is if you're a Georgian who is importing a large piece of physical equipment, then you can basically borrow money to import that product at a cheaper rate than you would do otherwise. And that basically means that things like hydropower stations and wind turbines and hotels and other big physical investments potentially become cheaper. And so that just encourages everyone to invest more and more easily. So yeah, I mean, I think there is good reason to believe that if that improves, it will help the investment climate generally, but not necessarily because people are looking at this in the way they look at Moody's and Fitch to decide whether Georgia is investable, but just because it will make it cheaper for them to invest in the country.
Thank you so much for these explanations. Thank you, Mr. Welton.
No problem. Thank you.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.